Okay, strap in everyone because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're talking Alien, the franchise that's been scaring the spacesuits off of audiences for decades.
And we're not just talking about the movies themselves. Oh no, we're going behind the scenes, digging into the creative battles, the near misses, all the things that could have sunk this franchise before it even left the launch pad.
We've got a killer video essay that breaks down the entire saga, from the original chest-bursting classic to the, well, let's just say the more recent installments.
What's really striking is how much the Alien saga mirrors how science fiction itself has changed over the years.
From niche genre to full-blown blockbuster behemoth.
Right. And it all started with this guy, Dan O'Bannon, a writer with a wild imagination and apparently a pretty rough stomach.
Yeah, the xenomorph's whole life cycle, bursting out of chests and all that. He got the idea from his own struggles with Crohn's disease.
Talk about finding inspiration in the strangest places, but then you take that visceral horror and combine it with H.R. Geiger's biomechanical art. Genius. Pure genius.
No wonder those images are burned into our brains. That chestburster scene, I mean, come on. But think about this. It's the mid-70s, right? Sci-fi is seen as this kind of cheesy B-movie genre, and along comes Alien, this script that studios thought was too dark, too violent, too much of everything.
And little did they know, Star Wars was about to change everything.
Talk about perfect timing. Suddenly, studios were tripping over themselves to get in on the sci-fi action.
And Fox, sitting on O'Bannon's script, they finally saw dollar signs.
But of course, there was a catch.
They weren't out to let a couple of unknowns. I mean, O'Bannon, yeah, he was a writer, but Scott was mainly known for commercials at that point, loose on what they hoped would be their next big cash cow.
So they bring in Brandywine Productions, Walter Hill specifically, to kind of, polish things up.
And keep a tight leash on the creativity while they were at it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But then their choice for director, a young Ridley Scott. Interesting choice.
Scott wasn't a die-hard sci-fi guy, but you can tell he got, the power of the script, the intensity. Plus, he'd seen what Star Wars was doing, so maybe that lit a fire under him, too.
And thank goodness it did. Scott brought this meticulous eye for detail, this almost documentary-like approach that made Alien feel so real, so terrifyingly possible.
It wasn't just a monster movie, it was an experience. Speaking of unexpected choices, can you imagine anyone else as Ripley but Sigourney Weaver?
Well, get this. Scott actually considered Meryl Streep for the role.
Whoa, just whoa. That would have been a completely different film.
Right. Makes you think, how much of Ripley's toughness was Weaver herself, and how much was already there in the character?
Here's another one. You ready for this? Originally, Ripley wasn't even supposed to be a woman.
No way.
Yep. Male lead. That was the initial plan.
Wow. So how'd it change?
Walter Hill, he's the one who suggested making Ripley a woman, thought it would shake things up.
Well, he wasn't wrong.
He had no idea he was creating a feminist icon. Seriously. Ripley became the blueprint, showed everyone that audiences wanted to see heroes who weren't afraid to kick some alien butt.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, even with all that creative energy.
Yeah.
I mean, the studio was still looking over their shoulders the whole time.
Oh, yeah, and O'Bannon and Scott, they butted heads on set more than a few times, especially about the tone of the film.
Like what kind of disagreements?
Well, O'Bannon, he wanted more humor sprinkled in, which, fair enough. But Scott, he was laser-focused on building a horror masterpiece.
And then there's Fox, right? Word on the street is they were not thrilled with the final cut. Too dark, too violent, not enough star power.
Can you imagine? This film that practically invented sci-fi horror almost got buried because it was too intense.
It's mind-boggling. Thank goodness someone at Fox had some sense and fought for it.
Someone who understood what they had, and man, did that gamble pay off. Alien blew up the box office, scared the pants off audiences, and left them wanting more.
Which brings us to, of course, the sequel, Aliens. James Cameron, Mr. Action himself, taking on a horror classic. Talk about a bold move.
It was a risk, for sure. Could have gone either way. But Cameron's a master at understanding story, even when he's jumping genres.
And jump he did. Aliens took everything we loved about the first film, the suspense, the creature design, and just injected it with pure adrenaline.
It was evolution, not imitation. Cameron gave us a full-blown action horror epic, and he knew exactly who he wanted leading the charge, Sigourney Weaver.
And talk about knowing your worth. Those contract negotiations were legendary.
Oh, for sure. She went to bat for herself, for equal pay, for creative control. I mean, at one point, they were even talking about writing Ripley out entirely.
Can you imagine the uproar?
It would have been insane. Ripley without Ripley. Thankfully, they came to their senses. Weaver got herself a historic deal and cemented Ripley as a true cinematic icon. She wasn't just the survivor, she was the hero.
And Cameron brought us a whole new crew to love. Hicks, Vasquez, even poor, terrified Hudson.
You can't talk about Aliens without quoting Hudson at least once. It's like a requirement. Cameron's way of balancing that dark humor with the intense action, that's what makes it so rewatchable.
Game over, man. Game over.
Yeah.
Instantly quotable. It went beyond horror. It became a pop culture phenomenon. But, well, success has a way of, let's just say, complicating things.
Oh, yeah. The honeymoon phase was definitely over. Get ready for Alien 3, because things are about to get messy.
Okay, so if Aliens was like strapping onto a rocket and blasting off, Alien 3 was like crashing that rocket into, well, let's just say a planet of bad choices.
Oh, man, that is a perfect way to put it. You've got Cameron off doing his own thing, Scott's busy with other projects, and the studio. They're like a kid with a winning lottery ticket, no idea what to do next.
It's like they forgot everything that made those first two films so great. Instead, it's just this revolving door of writers, directors, scripts getting tossed left and right. Finally, this young director, David Fincher, super talented visually, gets handed this ticking time bomb of a production.
It's almost like they thought, hey, let's take the music video guy and throw him into a dark, gritty sci-fi sequel. What's the worst that could happen?
Right. Seriously. But here's the thing. Even with all that studio interference, Fincher's Alien 3, visually, it's stunning. It's atmospheric, bleak. You really feel this sense of inescapable dread. Like there's nowhere for these characters to run, nowhere to hide.
And let's be real, no one was prepared for that opening act.
Oh, absolutely not. I was in the theater. I remember it vividly. The whole audience gasped when they realized what Fincher had done. Newt, Hicks, gone. Just like that.
Bold move, for sure. Brutal, even. Set a very different tone from the get-go.
Completely. Way more nihilistic than anyone was expecting.
And look, from a purely artistic standpoint, it's a valid choice. The problem is you've got fans who are deeply invested in these characters, and that kind of decision, it hits hard.
It's like a punch to the gut, for sure. And it didn't help that Fincher was basically at war with the studio every step of the way.
Oh, I've heard the stories. Rewrites, reshoots, battles over the edit, you name it. Fincher was fighting for every single frame of that film.
Literally fighting for his vision. Even filming scenes in secret just to protect them. Talk about dedication, but also what a nightmare for a young director.
No wonder he's gone on record saying that Alien 3 is one of his biggest regrets, which is a shame because I think with a little more freedom, a little less interference, it could have been something truly special.
It's a classic example of what happens when the studios need to control things, just completely steamrolls the artistic vision. And sadly, with Alien Resurrection, things didn't exactly improve.
Oh boy, Resurrection. If Alien 3 was a crash landing, this one was like trying to rebuild the rocket while it was still on fire and in midair.
You've got Ripley back, kind of. She's cloned now. There's this new alien hybrid. And get this, Joss Whedon wrote the script.
You'd think, on paper at least, that's a guaranteed home run, right? Whedon, the king of witty dialogue, strong female characters, he's got the Alien franchise. What could go wrong?
Right. It practically writes itself. But then they bring in Jean-Pierre Jeunet to direct, the guy who made Delicatessen, City of Lost Children. Visually stunning films, but definitely, well, let's just say unique.
Unique is a good way to put it. Very talented, but a very specific style. And suddenly, you don't have one clear vision. You've got this tug-of-war happening. Whedon's dialogue, Jeunet's visuals, and the studio's still back there somewhere, convinced they know best.
And what's the end result? A visual spectacle? Absolutely. That underwater xenomorph chase, still incredible. But tonally, it's all over the place. The story feels disjointed. Even Whedon himself was like, yeah, that's not exactly what I had in mind.
It just goes to show you can have all the talent in the world, but if there's not a shared vision, if the studio's meddling too much, even a franchise like Alien can stumble.
And stumble it did. It made money, sure, but critically, not so much. It felt like the studio trying to squeeze one last drop out of a franchise they'd already run dry.
Which, unfortunately, brings us to what some might call the dark ages of the Alien saga, the Alien versus Predator era.
Okay, I gotta ask, because I still don't get it. What possessed someone to think, hey, those xenomorphs, the stuff of nightmares, those creatures that make you question the very nature of existence, let's make them fight some dudes in rubber predator suits?
Classic Hollywood, right. To take two things that people vaguely remember liking, smash them together, hope no one notices there's no real story, and boom, instant cash grab.
And the kicker, they made two of them. 2-2-0. Somebody was watching those movies and saying, yes, more of this, please.
Look, I enjoy a mindless action flick as much as the next person, but in terms of adding anything worthwhile to the Alien legacy, let's just pretend those movies never happened, shall we?
Agreed. Thankfully, it seems like someone at Fox finally realized they'd wandered a little too far from the nest. Because who do they call to resuscitate the franchise? None other than Papa Scott himself.
Ridley Scott, back in the director's chair. And with Prometheus, he made it clear he wasn't interested in just retreading old ground. He wanted to explore the origins, the mythology, the big questions about creation, humanity, artificial intelligence.
It was ambitious, visually spectacular, and let's be honest, it divided audiences.
Oh, totally.
Some people loved it. The deeper themes, the connection to the engineers, this whole new layer of mythology Scott was building. Others, they just wanted more familiar scares. They felt like it strayed too far from what made Alien, well, Alien.
And you can definitely see how those criticisms, how that desire for something more familiar influenced Scott's next film, Alien Covenant.
Oh, absolutely. Covenant felt like Scott trying to find a middle ground, trying to please everyone.
More xenomorphs, a more direct connection to the original film. But in trying to do too much, it kind of lost its own identity along the way.
Visually, it's stunning, don't get me wrong. And Michael Fassbender, phenomenal as always. But it just didn't quite stick the landing.
It's like that old saying, you can't please everyone. Sometimes the most interesting stories come from taking risks, from exploring new territory, even within a beloved franchise.
So where does that leave us? With a franchise that feels, once again, a little lost in space.
Not entirely, because the one constant throughout the Alien saga, the thing that connects every film, good or bad, is that central question. What does it mean to be human when faced with the unknown?
And what will we do to survive, even if it means confronting our deepest fears?
Exactly. And that question, it's just as relevant today as it was back when that first xenomorph crawled out of the shadows.
It's true, isn't it? That deep-seated fear, the one that says there's something out there bigger, stronger than us, just waiting to pick us off, it's primal.
And the xenomorphs, they tap right into that fear, don't they? Relentless, terrifying, they make you question everything you thought you knew about, well, about existence itself.
And that's the thing about aliens, even when the movies themselves aren't perfect, those big questions about what it means to be human, what we'll do to survive, they linger, they stick with you.
They really do. I mean, that's why we keep coming back for more, right? Hoping for that perfect blend of smart sci-fi and edge-of-your-seat horror.
It's that legacy, I think. That ability to get under your skin and stay there, that's what makes the Alien saga so fascinating to dissect.
Absolutely. It's messy, sure. It's frustrating at times. But it's a journey, and it says so much about how we see these genres, sci-fi, horror, even how we see ourselves.
So when the dust settles, in this whole battle between the artists and the studio execs, who comes out on top?
Honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. Sometimes that tension, it creates something incredible, like Aliens.
And sometimes it's a cautionary tale, like what happened with Alien 3.
Exactly. And sometimes it's just a reminder that even the best franchises can make some head-scratching decisions.
Alien vs. Predator, I'm looking at you.
But here's the thing, even with the missteps, the conversation never really stops, does it? The fans, they keep the debate going, they analyze, they dissect. It's a testament to the power of these stories.
It really is. And there's this whole generation of filmmakers who grew up on Alien, inspired by the visuals, the characters, the world building.
It's like those xenomorphs. They didn't just burst out of people's chests, they planted a seed in our collective imagination.
And that seed has grown into this massive, complicated, sometimes downright contradictory franchise that we're still trying to figure out.
Absolutely. So where does Alien go from here, right? I mean, will we see Scott finally realize his vision for the prequels? What about Fede Alvarez's new film? Can he breathe some fresh life into things?
And let's not forget the rumors of another Alien vs. Predator movie. Maybe this time they'll get it right.
We can always hope, right? But one thing's for sure, the xenomorphs, they're not going back into the shadows anytime soon.
And thank goodness for that.
Because even with all the ups and downs, the Alien saga reminds us that some stories, some fears, they're just too primal to ever truly die.
They evolve, they adapt, and sometimes that evolution is just as terrifying, just as thrilling as the original nightmare.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to sign off.
Thanks for exploring the dark side of space with us in this deep dive into the Alien saga. We'll see you next time. for another thrilling adventure into the unknown.